We hear a lot about psychedelic-assisted therapy, but 3 out of 4 people who choose to consume psychedelics do so at home or in nature with friends or loved ones. I'm April, founder of SetSet, an integration platform to help you get the most out of your psychedelic experiences. The podcast episode you're about to listen to may reference one of my previous shows, The High Guide or How to Do the Pot, because I've been a trusted source in cannabis and psychedelics since 2015. I invite you to visit getsetset.com and sign up for our newsletter to receive your free guide on set and setting to make the most of your next psychedelic journey.
Welcome to my office. If you guys want to sign in, we can do that, and then I will show you all to my
Raven Duckett is showing me around the operations of her legal cannabis delivery and distribution business in Oakland, California.
So we're here at Canaplex. Canaplex is a warehouse. It houses, I would say, more than 10 cannabis businesses. We're all separated by our own little mobile modulars, like a little trailer. We've been here since January.
Oakland is a pioneer of responsible cannabis policy, from permitting structures like the Canaplex to its social equity program. And what is a social equity program in cannabis? It's a municipal program designed to create pathways to participate and succeed in the cannabis industry as a way to reverse the damage caused by federal cannabis prohibition, the war on drugs, which continues to disproportionately affect minority communities. Oakland's social equity program was the first in the country. And other cities, as well as state legislatures, are following their lead, trying to make sure that the benefits of legalization go to people and neighborhoods harmed the most in previous decades by drug policy and enforcement.
So what the Oakland Equity Program did was it gave priority licensing to people who were from the city of Oakland or had been arrested for a marijuana crime in the city of Oakland. My team qualified because of where my husband grew up. It's actually around here a little bit. And this is a lot of the areas that were affected. And so kind of how the Equity Program decided the areas to take a step back, they did an equity analysis. So the city ran a study and saw that people in certain areas were 10 times as likely to get arrested for a marijuana crime. So they picked those areas, and if you were from those areas, you were able to get priority licensing. And so what they said on the other end was that people who want to incubate these teams can also get a license in Oakland. And that is the only way that a non-equity person, company, whoever, can get a license in Oakland is to incubate an equity team. What the Oakland Equity Program is really trying to do, and what equity programs are trying to do, is redistribute wealth and really create generational wealth for people who have been a part of a system that has been, until now, created to, destroy them.
Can you tell us a little bit about what those city council meetings were like leading up to legalization?
Yeah, they're emotional, honestly, if, you look at it like that, because it's like, people coming up to testify about how cannabis has helped them, how they support cannabis in the area, and all of this. And then you have some people who come up and are kind of like not in my neighborhood kind of feeling when they're like, because you have stories of people being like, well, my brother was thrown in jail because he had an ounce on him, so I'll never touch that cannabis plant in my whole entire life. It's like the worst thing you could do. Kind of like feelings, which is like, that's a real emotion and that's a real experience that you had, but it doesn't have anything to do with weed, and it has a lot to do with the system that we live in and things were set up. But it's like people associate a lot of that, a lot of all the like fears and trauma of like the whole war on drugs is directly associated with weed, particularly. And so that was very apparent.
Do you feel like the numbers of people of color who are getting licenses, who are part of the equity program, is that going to move the needle?
I don't know. I think it's hard to tell. I think that as it is right now, I would say probably not, because I don't think that the people who are in the Oakland Equity Program have the amount of support and have the amount of funds and have like the network that is necessary to really dominate in what is going to be national, if not global, within the next like 5 to 10 years or something like that. Like, I think that there needs to be some sort of reform in the sense that applicants need to be supported better. And I also think that the focus, especially as new equity programs come about, should be more about community reinvestment. I think the assumption that everyone who was affected by the war on drugs can only benefit from cannabis legalization by becoming a part of the industry is very narrow. And I feel like I understand if people don't want to be a part of the industry, but I think that there are a lot of people who were affected by the war on drugs who deserve to be, rectified for that. And so I hope that communities get some investment. I hope that job programs come out of this that have nothing to do with cannabis, like training, those kind of things, parks and schools and things like that. I hope that communities get rebuilt. What if we could take these dollars and invest it in the streets that we were just driving around that need it?
Welcome back to How to Do the Pot. I'm April Pride, and I do the pot. In 2016, I founded Vanderpop, a cannabis company for and by women. Now, with my new venture of Like Minds and this podcast, we're exploring everything women want and need to know in this new era of legal cannabis. We've talked about pain and pregnancy. Now we're going to go back in time a little bit to understand where the modern cannabis industry came from and the long shadow cast by the war on drugs. We're also going to talk about the ways in which our cannabis consumption today, yours and mine, can help work to undo the harms created by the war on drugs. So, how did we get here? Let's look at the U.S. of the last century, and sadly, not much has changed. An influx of immigrants to the U.S. fleeing a post-1910 Mexican Revolution sparked nationalist ideals. Sound familiar? Everything foreign was painted as bad. Thus began a rebrand of cannabis to marijuana, the Spanish spelling for the phonetic pronunciation of the Chinese word for cannabis. So it was in this climate that the temperance movement successfully led the federal ban on alcohol in 1919. The change in regulation included pharmacy reform to reduce opioid dependence. Sound familiar? Since cannabis was known to be used recreationally, it was painted as an abused medication. In fact, when cannabis was effectively made illegal with the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, the plant was the third most prescribed ingredient to pharmacists who distributed cannabis as medicine in compounds, salves, tinctures you may recall from our episode on pharma. The war on drugs is not the first time the government has used prohibition as a means of social control. Alcohol prohibition, which spanned 13 years from 1920 to 1933, makes a sound case for government overstepping reach with disastrous results. There was the rise of the mob. The mob came into existence because they were protecting their distribution of bootlegged alcohol. And states' attorneys at the time of Prohibition, 44% of all of the cases that they were trying were alcohol related. So it completely overwhelmed the justice system. And here we are today, right? We've seen mass incarceration brought about by, honestly, petty drug offenses. 50% of all drug arrests are cannabis, and 80% of those arrests are for simple possession. And people go to jail for this. The war on cannabis started before the war on drugs, but even with legalization gaining steam in the 2000s, arrests and prosecutions keep going up. Between 2001 and 2010, there were over 8 million arrests related to cannabis sale and possession across the U.S. Most of the people affected were Black or Latino. Higher arrests and incarceration rates for these communities are not reflective of increased prevalence of drug use, but rather of law enforcement's focus on urban areas, lower income communities, and communities of color. White and Black people smoke weed at the same rate, period. Even so, Black Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession. According to the ACLU, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, and in Washington, D.C., Blacks are 7.5 to 8.5 times more likely to be arrested for having weed. And I want to focus on Washington, D.C. because the laws there say it all. Currently, the laws make selling weed an enforceable crime, but possessing weed is not a crime. And you may say, April, arrests are falling, decriminalization, has really taken hold across the U.S. And you're right. The numbers are looking better, but it's the disparities. Those have not changed, right? And that's what's disturbing. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We wanted to get into the mindset of the people who are arresting others, right? Law enforcement.
My name is Lee Maddox. So I began my career as a very naive 20-year-old when I joined the Maryland State Police. And I worked with that organization for almost 20 years, worked my way up through the ranks, and eventually retired in 2007 at the rank of captain.
Lee Maddox loved her career in law enforcement. Her father was a Marine lieutenant colonel and expected her to serve her community. When she was 19, a good friend of hers was murdered, and Lee took issue with how local law enforcement handled the investigation. So she decided to become a state trooper, and she dove into police work, working patrol, investigations. But it was the death of another friend, close to the end of her career, that completely changed how she thought about police work and the war on drugs.
His name was Ed Totley, and he was a very dear friend of mine. He had been working a undercover investigation in Washington, D.C., and this occurred back in the early 2000s. And the bad guy took his money and went to go in to purchase the drug for him, but then doubled back around and shot him in the head. And that guy's in jail now for life for doing that. But when that happened, it really kind of rocked me because, you know you're doing dangerous work, but you don't really realize how close you walk to that line of death until you lose someone close to you. And when Ed died, I immediately thought to myself, why are we putting people of that caliber in harm's way? Why are we doing it business that way? Why do we care that much about this brick of cocaine that we're going to sacrifice this father of 3 kids? It really made me stop and hit pause on my career and think more deeply about what we were doing in our communities and what we were doing not only to the communities that were being policed, but also to the community of police officers that were doing the policing. Well, I think as a police officer, you saw that we were arresting people over and over again for the same thing, and drug use was not going down. In fact, drug use was going up. So there was no correlation between our arrest and reduced crime. It was having the opposite effect. And then once I retired and went into the communities and worked as a lawyer with one-on-one with folks who were living through the consequences, the collateral consequences of these failed policies, and particularly criminalization of their lives, being forced to pay over and over again for what is a seemingly innocuous offense like possession of marijuana. And, 10 years later, they still can't, get a decent apartment because they're coming up dirty on the criminal history check. And it took a while after that for me because I stayed on the job for a while and oversaw some pretty big operations. But once I retired and got down on the streets of Baltimore City, that's when I realized we needed to end the war on drugs, that it had just failed miserably.
In June of 1971, President Richard Nixon declared drug abuse to be public enemy number 1.
America's public enemy number 1 in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
And 2 years later, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, was created. In that Nixon speech, you can see Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, on stage with the president. Years later, Ehrlichman told Harper's Magazine, he said, quote, "The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had 2 enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." Unquote. In 1986, I was 10 years old, and as a 5th grader at Sedgefield Elementary School, In Newport News, Virginia, I vividly remember being in the auditorium/cafeteria, standing and listening to 3 words that would define a generation's attitudes around drugs and alcohol. Just say no. Just Say No was the pet project of First Lady Nancy Reagan. It's an anti-drug campaign that was very effective, and President Ronald Reagan's expansion of the war on drugs was in many ways driven by increased media coverage of and resulting public nervousness over the crack epidemic that arose in the early 1980s. This concern over crack use helped drive political support for Reagan's hardline stance on illegal drugs, including cannabis, and the intense prosecution of anyone caught using or selling drugs. That meant increased enforcement and harsher punishments and sentences. And for Liz Mora, a young single mother, pregnant with her daughter Nicole, this policy would impact the rest of her life and that of her family.
My name is Maria Mora. I go by Liz. I am mother to this wonderful person over here, Esteban.
My name is Esteban Araya.
So why don't we start with that, Liz? Why don't you tell us why we're here, why telling your story and sharing your story will be significant for so many listeners?
Yes, so I was mid-20s, pregnant. I made an unwise decision to transport weed, marijuana. I unfortunately, or fortunately, I didn't make it very far. My first one, I got caught. Possession, transportation with the intent to sell, which, of course, I was just literally what they call a mule.
After serving her time, Liz was turned down for jobs. She wasn't able to obtain a student loan to go back to school, so she had to work long hours in low-wage jobs, more time spent away from her children.
Over a year in federal custody, 2 years probation, but I losing my kids, thank God I was able to put them with a family that I trusted, but the whole having to be away from them for so long. When my daughter was 7 months, Esteban was 9 years old. It was pretty hard. It happened in 1998. I was pregnant with her, and then I went through the court thing, still pregnant, and I had her. I had Nicole was a few months old when I got sentenced. So
it's mainly that literally just triggered everything in our life from there.
From there,
because financially, I'm now 29 years old. So one of the things that I realized from my mom, I didn't understand, because I was, also angry with my mom. You know what I mean? Because growing up, it made a lot of tension between us because she had to be away. She couldn't really help. You know what I mean? She couldn't. There was just a lot that I didn't understand at the moment, and so that created more of a resentment for me because I didn't understand. You know what I mean? I didn't understand why we didn't have this or we didn't have that or why we didn't spend enough time together, and so but I was angry at her because I was like, why are you not doing what you're supposed to be doing?
Having a better job. Right. Because I had one before.
But I understood. Now I understand. It's like, wow, it really is something when you have those felonies, or especially federal or drug dealing crimes. You can't get into banking. You can't get into any type of real industry where you can even move up. Like you can even support yourself without living in neighborhoods where my mom didn't want to raise us. And thank God she actually got us out of these neighborhoods.
Today, in many places, including Los Angeles, where Liz and Esteban live, local governments are writing social equity into cannabis law. That is, special programs for people who've been directly harmed by the war on drugs. People like Liz Mora and her son Esteban, whose lives for the last 20 years have been impacted by cannabis criminalization. And now they have an opportunity to open a legal cannabis business.
We first learned about it. We went to the city. One of the city council members here in the city hall, they were having a meeting in regards to the cannabis regulation, and they were going to be getting all the feedback from the community stakeholders. And part of that was the social equity. I didn't know, what it was about, but I had already heard in the city that it was something to do with giving back in communities. I never really imagined exactly what it could be, but I was like, hey, I know I'm from certain communities that were affected by the war on drugs. I mean, half of my family went to prison. Other ones are dead because of the war on drugs, which is very sad to say, but it's the reality. And so we kind of were going to this meeting just to try to get information. And everybody was shocked that walked in there, because most of the people that were chasing this industry, were not necessarily from these communities. They're investors. They've been following the industry, or they maybe already have some type of positions in the industry, but they weren't from these communities.
Liz Mora is hoping to be one of those people who get some investment.
I want to be able to, first of all, impact the community in a good way. Me with my chronic pain, having to come down from being on painkillers that, have all these other side effects for your body. I can see that health-wise, it's better for me to take these other alternatives, and I want to make that available and give the information to all these other people, especially in the Hispanic community where we're going to have our location, that they don't really know. They still look at it as, oh, you just want to get high. And it's not about that. It's about educating our older people and younger people into the good that this can do.
So what could be a way to move the needle and propel more women, more people of color, and those affected by the war on drugs into the cannabis industry? One way might be related to programs like The Initiative in Portland. Full disclosure, I was a board member of the program. Its intent is to provide tools, mentoring, training, and access to funding that female entrepreneurs need to succeed in the cannabis industry. And Raven Duckett, who we met at the Canaplex in Oakland, she was a recent inaugural participant. It really picks up where the Oakland Equity Program left off.
It was really focused on raising investment dollars, which was, something that was really missing from the Oakland Equity Program, I think, because, while they did give us a clear path to licensing, it wasn't really a lot of help and support in how we could raise the funds to really make our business a scalable business, especially in California, one of the largest economies in the world and one of, the largest regulated market in the United States right now.
Social equity programs, incubators, access to capital, and those with the capital having an open mind in terms of who they invest in. We need all of this in order to build an equitable cannabis industry moving forward. Like so many issues of sustainability, we need to acknowledge the harm that's been done and work as founders and consumers of cannabis to make the best possible choices. So, for today's High Five, our tips for how to do the pot. 5 ways that consumers of cannabis can be part of making sure the industry is equitable going forward. Number 1, know where your elected officials stand on cannabis policy. If you don't live in a legal state, has cannabis been decriminalized in your community? Get to know your local officials. That's where these decisions are made. Number 2, know your farmer. I asked Raven if you wanted to create a supply chain that at every step touched a person of color, would you be able to do that? And she really struggled when it came to a farmer or a Black-owned farm. And there was one that she mentioned that's in LA, outside of LA, called Black Star. So do your research and find out who's growing plants in your state. Number 3, know who you're buying your weed from, who owns the local dispensary, who owns the delivery service that you call, and who are they hiring? Do you feel like when you approach a counter that the person looking back at you reflects you and your values and perhaps knows a little bit about where you came from? Support dispensaries that seem to be doing their part to make sure that everybody gets a chance to participate in this industry. Number 4, know the founder of businesses that you buy cannabis from. My business partner, Ellen, and I have tried to bring brands into the High Five that are women-owned, women-founded, that we feel have a place in this industry and are leaders, and we want to continue to see their success and to make sure that they thrive in this industry. We encourage you to go back to each episode, listen to the High Five, visit our website, of course, and find brands founded and run by women that you can purchase products from, and again, have a role and participate in their success. So number 5 is an example of a brand that I've loved for years. 2016 is when I found the Apothecary Case. Apothecary Brands was founded by Whitney Beatty. She is a Black woman who has left a very successful career in the entertainment industry after finding that an idea that she had, a locked storage box for cannabis, was something that everybody wanted. She has a son and she wanted to protect her kid from her stash, right? What mom doesn't. I know that's why I purchased my first Apothecary box. I wanted something that would keep my cannabis fresh. I can lock it. I leave it under my desk. I don't worry about it at all. And there's 4 jars. So I pick up strains and I can make sure that I've got a good assortment for people when I'm entertaining. There's also a grinder that's available with it. I mean, it really is the most beautiful starter kit for a cannabis collection that I can imagine. And let me give you a quick stat. Women only receive 2% of all venture funding, and Black women receive, a small fraction of that, 0.0006%. So she has built this business in spite of a lot of challenges, to say the least. It's been self-funded, at least for the first 3 years. We are firm believers that supporting brands led by amazing women like Whitney help to make this cannabis industry better for us all. I have not seen anything come out that touches Whitney's storage box that's locked and safe. She has my number for sure.